Great to be with you. I was on this stage a year ago, the opening AutoMobility, and it's great to see so many people back here in Los Angeles for this important gathering. I want to bring up our panel. We'll jump right in and get started. First, Terry O'Day, the Vice President of Product Strategy for EVgo. Josipa Petrunic, Executive Director and CEO of the Canadian Urban Transit Research and Innovation Consortium. Oh, I got that in the wrong order. Mark McNabb, CEO of Electrify America. And Boris von Bormann, CEO of Mercedes-Benz Energy. All right. Welcome, everybody. Grab our seats.
Yeah.
All right, so we're talking about convergence a lot today in this conference, but today we're really talking about how we accelerate the future of electrification of transportation. So we've seen the promise and the potential, yet in California, we still only have 5% of the vehicles sold in the last 6 months are electric vehicles. Nationally, it's about 1%, give or take. Yet we've seen regulators, whether it's our own California regulators here in the state or in China or in France or the UK, they're considering it, of banning the sale of internal combustion engines at some point. And we've also seen the incentive side. So we've seen both the carrot and the stick. But still, as Mark knows from running a passenger vehicle company, VW, before, the consumer demand is really critical here. And in my previous role as Chief Sustainability Officer for the city of Los Angeles, working with Mayor Garcetti, and we really set forth some bold goals to get more electric vehicles on the road in Los Angeles and got the LA Police Department to really be our champion internally in the city, along with our utility department, Water and Power, to move quickly. Now there's 200 pure battery electric vehicles, the most of any police fleet. It's for their non-emergency vehicles of any police fleet in the country. And that whole process of just getting the capacity, getting the chargers, seeing how the drivers use the vehicle was really a great learning experience for the city. Now, the mayor set goals for zero emissions goods movement, which is also going to be an incredible transformation and challenge. So all these, whether it's state, local, national goals, really the market and the capacity to drive the solutions are critical. So we know that EVs are cheaper than maintaining and driving an internal combustion engine. So what's needed to here in Los Angeles and California, across the United States, that'll help the market grow from this small percentage to something more meaningful for wide adoption? And we'll start with you, Terry.
Sure. Thank you, Matt. At EVgo, we're the nation's largest public fast charging company. We're approaching now almost 1,000 chargers on our network. And importantly, we're an owner-operator of the network, so we assure the customer experience, the quality of the experience, and the consistency, so you have the same price no matter where you go. And these networks that we've built are urban-based, so they're intra-city networks as opposed to intercity networks. And in our view, we are now highly focused on the next generation of high-power charging. Today's public charging standard that we operate is at 50 kilowatts, and it provides access to every vehicle on the road that accepts fast charging. The next generation will be 150 and 350, and so we have installed the first 150 kilowatt charger in Fremont, California. We're under construction on the first public 350
I wonder
station.
what company's based there. I can't remember.
There's a lot of users of our charging stations in Fremont, put it that way. And why we're focused on this, as I said, we're urban charging networks. We think it's important that people have a place to go that they know in their community, that they're familiar with to charge. We're seeing high levels of utilization on our urban chargers today. But key to unlocking that next generation of growth in EV sales, we think, is penetrating the multifamily market. Today, it's really difficult for you to have a charger at home if you live in a multifamily community. If you take my experience, I live in Santa Monica, and in Santa Monica, you'd have to say we're an early adopter market. It's flat, dense, affluent, progressive, and has a great climate. Those are sort of the 5 factors of early adopter markets. But 70% of us are renters. Another 10% are an owned multifamily. And we're not really different than Berkeley or New York or Washington or LA for that matter. And so if you have to cut your early adopter market by 70%, you don't have an early adopter market.
Yeah.
So we think urban high-power charging stations provide an opportunity with the new models coming to market that have longer range. An urban resident can charge their car once, twice a week at a grocery store, and that can meet their needs. And so we get out of the dynamic of trying to figure out how do you get a level 2 charger into a property. You know, for a lot of multifamily residents, they park on the street. You know, they don't have reliable overnight place to park. And so urban high-power charging, we think, unlocks EV sales. We think it also fits with the growing trend of professional drivers for transportation network companies like Uber and Lyft. Those folks that are currently driving for those companies, driving electric cars, are using our urban chargers at high levels of utilization, and building more of these high power stations will unlock that market as well. We think this is, these are the keys to the growth of the EV industry. Yeah,
I've seen some incredible utilization rates. Can't say who shared the data with me, but it's amazing with combine a high capacity EV with a shared mobility driver, and it's great. Josipa, so Los Angeles just passed about a year ago $120 billion measure to fund public transit in Los Angeles, and we're here to talk about passenger vehicles. So how do you see this answer to this question? We really want to accelerate electrification of transportation and passenger mobility. What's your view of how we get there?
Yeah, sure. So I think what I'm about to say is probably a bit anathema and uncouth in a room full of car lovers. And what I'm about to say is essentially, if we truly believe in electrifying transportation, then the future is to kill the car. There's no doubt. If the goal is carbon reduction, emissions reduction, climate action, then killing the car is part of that. Some of the variables that are going to lead us to ubiquitous electrified transportation are the same variables that will eventually, in the short term, lead to electrified passenger cars, but eventually that will be surmounted by electrified mass shared mobility. So the future that I'd put in front of you is one that's low carbon, smart shared mobility, where you have really transit and mass transit at the forefront of the electrification of transport innovation spectrum. So if I can build on that, there's two kind of columns you have to think about. The first column is the technology column. If we're talking about transit infrastructure, transit innovation, most of you know transit is typically conservative, is not populated by people from an innovation background, and is generally not funded to be innovative and cutting edge to accept higher levels of risk than normal. So to put transit at the forefront, there are some technology challenges in electrification that they have to address. One is high power charging standardization. So you talk about getting to 300, 350. We're already doing electric buses at 450 kilowatts of charging, and the next step is 1 megawatt. There's no doubt that is where we're going. The next step is energy storage integration, and the next step after that is optimized route application. You do that, and you will get transit agencies, if they are funded to do that, at the forefront of the electrification agenda. Now, the second column is the policy perspective. And here's where I would say, the uncouth comments might be coming out. On the policy perspective, if, again, the goal is carbon reductions to get to an electrified future, then we have to start pricing the car out of the market. And that means carbon pricing, which California has done, Ontario, Quebec. It also means pricing kilometers, and that's not new to a lot of you, pricing the kilometers we use for a pay-to-play model. And it also, lastly, means pricing suburbia. So every square kilometer that you are away from a center of urban density, you are paying for that in your land transfer tax or in the cost of your house. Put those three pricing mechanisms together, and for the next 10 years, give electric cars a privilege where they don't have to pay the full weight of that. And you're going to see a rapid transformation of transit at the forefront of electrification, short-term electrification of passenger cars, and ultimately the death of the car. And that's what I would say is the future and the pathway to electrification.
Throwing down the gauntlet, AutoMobility, I see it. Well, that said, a potentially elegant policy solution, yet we're in the car capital of the world, Los Angeles. Mark, in your previous jobs, you sold a lot of cars in this market, one of the biggest and most important in the country, if not the world, just from an influencer standpoint, let alone the number of customers here. But now you've got a new mandate. How do you answer this question? How do we accelerate the adoption of EVs?
Well, I look at it very similar to Terry. We look at the reasons why people avoid EVs today. Number one reason, single biggest reason for avoidance, when you look at it, comes down to basically there are no stations available. Where is the fast charging availability? And then the second one is speed, and the speed of the charge. So just as Terry said, in his answer that 350 kilowatt chargers, just to give you a rough idea of the speed of that charge, that's 20 miles per minute. You compare that today to what's out there, and it is exponentially faster than what's available today. So that's a 200 kilowatt charge. You're looking at in 20 minutes, or 10 minutes, excuse me. So pretty exceptional. I think speed is one. I think second one is really, when we talk about is purpose placing these stations, is not just to put the stations where people think they should be. You need to put data and science behind where they should be. And that's predicting where EV sales will go, and then making sure that you look at the energy gaps out there and make sure that you put the stations where they'll get used. And I think from those two perspectives alone, that helps. And then lastly, on to move off of kind of the charging side, but to look on the car side, I think cost. I think cost is key. Cost both from an infrastructure standpoint, how do you mitigate demand charges in the future, because the infrastructure companies are having a difficult time with profitability due to the high tariffs that are out there. So I think there's a lot that needs to be done there, but also battery cost. We saw the last speaker talk about the cost per cell getting down to about $100 per kilowatt hour on a cell level. At a pack level, you need to be somewhere around $100 on a pack level per kilowatt hour. So a very, very substantial change needs to happen, I think, in the future from a cost standpoint in order to get adoption up. Yeah,
important questions. Boris, your company's based in Sunnyvale, but you actually live here in LA. We always like that when we have innovative car companies and AutoMobility executives living in Los Angeles. But so you know the traffic challenges. We're moving to 100% electric vehicle buses by 2030. So we have worse air quality than we've had in a long time. What's your vision of how we accelerate this future of EVs?
Yeah, obviously being last. First of all, thank you, Matt, for hosting a panel and inviting me, and Mercedes-Benz Energy to the panel. I obviously can't underwrite what Giuseppe said. Having a car company as a 100% shareholder of our company, killing the car, I don't think is quite the option. We do believe, though, that customer choice is very important and customer offering, right? So at the moment, you obviously do have electric cars on the road, and I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all to everyone. So you have to have a certain product offering that fits everyone's desire and behavior pattern that you can actually use electric. So at Mercedes-Benz, we truly believe in that. So we're going to offer plug-in electric vehicles that are going to attach to a certain market. We're going to have 5 new vehicles on the road next year that are over 50 mile in range just on a plug-in level. And then obviously we're looking to electrify our whole fleet with 10 full electric vehicles on the road by 2022. So that gives that customer choice. So that way, no matter what income category and what behavioral category you're in, you have a choice to actually step into an electric vehicle or a plug-in electric vehicle, so that way you can do the trips. My neighbors, they always go to Big Bear and Mammoth, and they're avid outdoors. Just a pure electric might not fit their needs, so they're looking for a plug-in with a long range so they can use it in the city, as you mentioned, in LA, drive around LA, 20 miles for 5 hours, and then step into the vehicle and do a combustion engine, go into Mammoth or other places. The next big thing, obviously, and it was addressed already on the panel, is infrastructure. So infrastructure at home, infrastructure at multi-unit dwellings is very key, because 65% of the world's population lives in multi-unit and high-density dwellings. So how to attach to that customer with charging infrastructure is the key, and how do we solve that problem? And then fast charging, obviously, enough access to fast charging in your area that you live in or that you work in, at work charging. And we also believe in a shared economy, and then it's one of the things we want to talk about on the panel. We at Mercedes-Benz developed CASE, which stands for Connected, Autonomous, Shared, and Electric. And within that CASE organization, we're looking at all those aspects. So a shared economy, to me, is also shared infrastructure, for example. When we get to a point where we can share at-home charging infrastructure and make that as a destination charge available, all of these aspects are really key for us to really push electrification and transportation through the markets. And obviously, cost is a big factor. So we have obviously a passenger car side, which we're looking. We just launched the Mitsubishi Fuso, or the Fuso truck, which is 100%, almost 100% Daimler company, with the first lightweight electric truck in the market. which covers a very specific market, but is already on the road, so that's key. And we do look at electric buses, obviously, and public transportation as well. But to me, it has to be a mix. And autonomous is another big part that plays a role into it. Just increasing the utilization of a vehicle is going to change a lot of these items. So as soon as you have a vehicle utilized around 10% at the moment, if you get its utilization up to 50 or 60%, obviously through a shared and autonomous economy, that will make a huge impact on the way we look at transportation, and in my view, that has to be electric.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we've also seen a couple automakers commit to 100% EV line. I think it had a little, GM's announcement had a little something to do with, I imagine, China and their policy position. So we're going to see more options on the road, certainly from all sorts of manufacturers. But cost remains the issue. Just even from getting the dealership groups and their sales force really to want to sell EVs is tough, just given the margins that aren't there for automakers, from what I've heard. But all right. Before we go to our final question, we have a poll that we're going to put up for the audience. So hopefully you can give us your answers of how we accelerate this move towards an EV future. But that future we know, and you touched on it, Boris, is really focused on that it includes autonomy. So in 2028, the Olympics are going to be held here in Los Angeles. We have zero emissions goals, we have GHG reduction goals, we have all sorts of targets that LA, from an air quality standpoint, GHG reduction target, from a safety standpoint here on the streets of Los Angeles, from congestion. We want to accelerate this future. So what do we need? So when somebody shows up here from Singapore or Shanghai or Stuttgart in Los Angeles for the Olympics, that they're going to come and it's going to be not only an electric future, but a shared and autonomous and electric future. So quick answers. We got a couple minutes left. Terry, what do you think we need? Well,
at EVgo, we're highly focused. As an independent owner and operator of the largest fast charging network in the US, we are highly focused on the cost of operating that network. And we face an underlying cost structure that is divergent and highly diverse across the country based on the utility where we operate. And there's high fixed costs and low variable costs typically in the marketplace. So we are looking to integrate technologies and to work with utility partners to create a low-cost operating structure, because the reality is if we are going to achieve this objective that you laid out, we need to be lower cost than the gasoline alternative in the market. And today, public fast charging is not lower cost than gasoline. To get professional drivers and fleet operators to choose to drive electric, their fuel costs will have to be lower. And many of the analyses that we see about the projections of EV sales and utilization, if there's a total cost of ownership model that assumes a lower cost for fuel. And that's true when you're relying on residential charging in particular. Public charging needs to be highly focused on getting costs down, and we're integrating technologies, and like I said, working with public partners to do that, not just because it unlocks the market,
you gotta move on,
but also equity. Because if those multifamily residents are charging in public primarily, they face a higher cost structure today.
Yes, Sipa.
Yeah, sadly, I'm going to disagree with the audience here, because I'm going to focus on business innovation as the key driver. The reason why, if the question is long-distance trips or pure battery charging, and the issue there is charging infrastructure, then the business innovation has to happen on the utility side, and we haven't discussed that throughout the whole day today. The integration of high-power charging with energy storage devices, supercapacitors, and a new business model that allows utilities to charge and deliver services for maintenance, upgrading, upkeeping of those energy systems, that has to occur, and it has to be ubiquitous. Now, I'm less familiar with American utilities. I'm more familiar with Canadian utilities. Where you have vertically integrated utilities, this is happening. Where you have deregulated markets with lots of utilities competing, it's a much bigger challenge. But being able to pull in with a school bus, a coach, a transit vehicle, a high-powered charged electric vehicle, a passenger car, into a charging station on highways or in urban communities presupposes that somebody is managing that energy matrix. And today, that is nobody's job. Right now, there's lots of playing around the edges, but there's no systematic, well-integrated integrator of that energy system matrix for charging. So I would say that business innovation has to happen to motivate long distance and ubiquitous electric transportation.
Yeah, the organization I'm running, we're gathering utility executives, CARB, and others to have that conversation, and need automakers and EVSE providers to be at the table. As Mark knows, that's an important conversation too. So Mark, how do we have that future of the Olympic guest arriving in Los Angeles?
I'm actually going to agree with the audience. Surprise, I'm at a fast charging company. But no, I would just say, I think if you break it down to the simplest terms, it's about really, in my mind, making the electric vehicle the primary car in the house. I think if that happens, there are a lot of things that need to support that. Number one, we need to build a very competitive ecosystem, which includes fast charging. At Electrify America, we're actually going to build battery backup at most of our sites in order to mitigate some of the cost, the high variable cost of running these stations, which I think can help improve. I think, and I said it previously and I say it again, I think the focus on cost is enormous. We've seen 70% to 80% reduction in cell cost today. That still needs to come down significantly. And in a 250 kilowatt battery, you're talking anywhere from $7,000 to $8,000 of cost still needs to come out down the road. So cost to me is key. I think the adoption in mass transit, I think the companies like Proterra and some of these mass transit companies that are out there with electric vehicles, building that ecosystem to me is key, and putting people in those cars and in electrified vehicles so that they can experience it, I think is absolutely a must. And then lastly, I would say, and I think California is really a great example of this, is looking and putting their money where their mouth is. They've actually gone out and they incent the consumers to buy cars, but they also now are pushing through building codes to make sure that new construction is EV ready. So again, it's a little bit of a recipe of a lot of different things, but I think that in my mind, building that ecosystem is the most important.
City of LA just moved from EV ready requirement to actually EV chargers being installed in multifamily and commercial buildings. Boris, you're batting cleanup. How are you going to accelerate this future by 2028?
Well, to me, as I mentioned before, it's really a holistic approach, right? We can't look at it from one angle, just looking at what cars or a bus or public transport need to kill a car or we need to focus on this area. It's really to combine all these aspects together. So Mercedes-Benz Energy does some energy storage systems. We look at second life storage, which is going to drive the cost down as we have this huge capacity coming in batteries. As these batteries are coming out of its first use in the vehicle, they can move into energy storage to look at this whole ecosystem and how we bring the cost down as a global aspect. So we really have to look at the cost per mile and the cost of ownership to the users and what's the best solution there. So it could be public transport, it could be autonomous, it could be fast charging, it could be at home charging, it might be utility place. But really when we start looking at this from an industry's perspective and really start bringing all these aspects together into one holistic approach, I believe at that point we really can see the adoption on that's going to move forward. And at that point you also drive the cost down because you're really looking at all the elements working together as they're meant to be. And once you achieve that is really when you can see this taken off in my view. So that's what I hope for the Olympics. I know it's short view and we had a conversation over if an alien lands in Silicon Valley, it's a very different view than if one lands in Boise, Idaho. We have a lot of work to do, but it's going to be exciting for sure.
Absolutely. And we could keep going. We haven't even really talked about vehicle-to-grid integration and talking about utilities and all of that's going to happen. This is how the intelligence we can build into the grid in the future of transportation and how the infrastructure we're laying now is the autonomous fueling infrastructure of the future and all that. A lot more to discuss, but moving on to our next panel, I want to thank our panelists, Terry, Osipa, Mark, and Boris. Give them a round of applause.